So now I would like to introduce Donna Kelley, GEM board member, GEM USA from Babson College. You have got to know her through the video just there. And we're going to have a very interesting session on the, what the gold nuggets, those real gems from our research are in this 2019-2020 report. Thank you. I think it's just,
Is it on all right?
it's on.
Is it on? Okay, great. So I have to give Steve Spinelli a lot of credit for me being here on the stage. First of all, you hired me. And second, he left Babson. And when you left Babson, you were on the board, the GEM board, at the time. And Bill Bygrave came to me and said, Steve's left Babson to be president of some college in Pennsylvania, and will you join the GEM board? And I couldn't say no to Bill. And that was right around 2007. And so here I am 12 or 13 years later, and just really glad to be part of this community. I really feel like I have family from all over the world. It's just an amazing network. Entrepreneurship is a force for change in the world. We'll be talking a lot about the strategic development goals later on. But we can think about how entrepreneurs contribute toward the achievement of such goals in many different ways. And for just a few examples, entrepreneurship helps societies achieve economic growth, provides jobs, lifts families out of poverty, and ensures that all groups in society achieve equity. GEM is now 21 years old. And since 1999, we have involved 500 researchers from around the world. We've surveyed over 3 million adults in 114 economies. We've produced 850 global, national, and special topic reports. Since 1999, we have become the foremost authority on global entrepreneurship, and we reach policy, practitioner, educator, and academic audiences. We've had impact not only on the decisions and understanding of policymakers, but GEM is the most used data source in academic publications, including some real A-level publications like Administrative Science Quarterly and Journal of Business Venturing. So we can really see the impact we've had on these multiple diverse audiences. So why is GEM unique? Many of us know that GEM has a central methodology. We involve teams from all over the world, but we all follow a central protocol, really very carefully administered through the central data team, which we have to always thank. So we can make cross-national comparisons where you might not be able to. If you're looking at business registrations, first of all, you're not capturing all the entrepreneurs, because not everybody registers their business in every country. But also, how you define an entrepreneur might depend on how the country measures it. We measure it centrally. We measure it and follow the same protocol. We've been in existence for 21 years, so in many of the countries we can do longitudinal comparisons and look at how society has evolved and its attitudes, how entrepreneurial activities evolved and its impact. We have a comprehensive set of indicators on entrepreneurship, many unique sets of indicators like how do people think about entrepreneurship? What are societal attitudes? What is the participation rate across many phases in the process? Because we know that you need to have a bank of potential entrepreneurs, some of which will lead into the next phase, some of which we hope will become mature business owners. And if they exit their businesses, they may become stakeholders in other ways, such as being investors, advisors, maybe co-founders of new businesses. But a real asset of GEM, besides its data and its methodology, is the local expertise we have and the network and the collaboration among all the GEM teams. So this is really rare to really have this expertise that we can share in entrepreneurship, but also understanding about what's going on in our own countries or economies. And actually, Steve, you mentioned this, it's about the people. It's not about starting businesses. In fact, when I teach at Babson, I'm always saying to the students, we're not teaching you how to start a business necessarily. We're training you to become an entrepreneur, no matter what you do in your career, and to also have that toolkit that at any point in your career, when you need to start a business, when you see an opportunity, when you have a friend in a bar say, hey, I've got an idea, what do you think? We think about creating entrepreneurs that have impact on multiple contexts and throughout their careers. So we've done a lot of new things in 2019, and most of my presentation will be focused on a lot of the new indicators that were developed for this survey. First of all, we have more detailed attitude measures, and some of the attitudes we ask yes/no questions. We've replaced them with 5-point Likert scales so we can get more fine-grained understanding of these attitudes. We've added new attitude measures, which I'll talk about. We've looked at multiple dimensions for motivation, so understanding that we might have financial motives for starting a business, but we also might start businesses for social reasons, to have impact socially, or to continue a family tradition. We've more and more recognized the role of employers and the role of established firms in entrepreneurial activity. And for both how we're selling, or the scope of our activity, and our level of innovativeness, we've measured this recognizing that whether you're innovative or whether you sell, it might be at a local level, it could be national, or it could be international. And then finally, we've launched a regional ecosystem assessment, which is very exciting, and we'll be talking about that in the Miami panel, and also within the GEM community about expanding that. So I actually have an admission to make. I had 1 C in college, and it was in geography. And first of all, when I was first at Babson, I had only been to Ireland. It was just going across the ocean. And then Steve Spinelli asked me to teach a course on entrepreneurship in Asia. And I went, geez, I better find out where all these countries are. But doing this map, I could hear my geography teacher go, well, if you had listened in class, this would have been a lot easier. But anyway, what we can see here is that we really have a span all over the world. We need to fill in a lot of these gaps, but our reach expands multiple economic development levels, and really we touch all regions. Large countries like Russia, United States, China, but even small countries like Luxembourg and Qatar. So this is a chart that we generally show every year. It's the total entrepreneurial activity levels across the 50 economies that participated in GEM in 2019. We've looked at 4 separate regions. We've kind of divided the world into these 4 general regions. Probably what you notice is that more or less within a region we have a lot of variation, but in Latin America, the Caribbean, overall pretty high rates, especially in Ecuador and Chile. And here are some themes that I think we can think about that GEM can inform and guide in terms of any stakeholders that want to address entrepreneurship. How do we develop talent and inspiration for entrepreneurship? How do we ensure that entrepreneurs are able to sustain their businesses into maturity? How do we promote entrepreneurship across all contexts? And how do we ensure that every group in society is able to participate in entrepreneurship? And then finally, thinking about the impact on an economy and the conditions that influence entrepreneurship, that facilitate entrepreneurs. So first, looking at talent and inspiration. These are the potential entrepreneurs, but they're also the people that support the work of the entrepreneurs. And I've just, rather than showing a chart with 50 countries on all of these, I've just highlighted some of the economies. So if I've left out any of yours, please note that in your report, every economy is represented. So I've just taken a few. Talent, seeing and acting on entrepreneurial opportunities. So we want people in society that are alert to opportunities and are willing to act on them. As you can see, as an example, in Ireland and Netherlands, so up to 2/3 or more, see lots of opportunities typically, and they're willing to act on them. In contrast, probably what's interesting, and I think this has a lot of implications, so you have two other developed economies where they're alert to opportunities, but less willing to act on them. So why might that be? Could it be that there are lots of other opportunities that compete for entrepreneurship? So I know, and we see this with our students when they're graduating, they say, should I start a business or should I get a job and pay my student loans, right? There's always that tension that you have with opportunity costs. On the other hand, we have a couple of economies where there's less alertness to opportunities around them, but a high willingness to act. Another measure that we've added this year is a question on whether people think I'm highly innovative as a person. And on the right-hand side, you see these bars are pretty high. These countries, these economies really span all economic development levels in all regions. However, on the left-hand side, we have developed economies from Asia and Europe where the innovativeness is not as high. Now, why do people start businesses? Well, as this chart shows, the two sets of bars in the middle, and I've looked at this by gender, so the orange bar is female and the blue bar is male. Most of the time it's economic. Either I need to create a source of income when jobs are scarce on the left, or on the right-hand side to build great wealth or a very high income. But when we look on the left side, still a substantial amount of people have social motives, okay? They want to make a difference. And then if we look by gender, we can see that women are slightly more likely to say they started to make a difference, whereas as men are, and actually slightly likely to almost be necessity motivated because jobs are scarce, whereas men are slightly more likely to be starting to build wealth or income. A little bit less prevalent, but still significant, is continuing a family tradition. And so family business is also really important in terms of a motivator. So let's look at sustaining businesses. This is always really important, and sometimes I think it doesn't get a lot of attention. We always think about getting people to start. But just getting people to start is not enough. We need them to have the ambition to sustain their businesses, have the capabilities to sustain the business, and then we hope the environment around them enables them to keep these businesses going into maturity. Here we have Madagascar and Brazil. Very high rates of TEA, total entrepreneurial activity, in the blue bars, and that really creates a big foundation for going into mature business activity. So we can say that, yeah, if you have a big bank of entrepreneurs, we know that not all of them are going to stay in business years later, but it's more likely that you'll have a thriving, sustained business activity level. However, on the other side, if you have a smaller bank of entrepreneurs and less established business activity, as we see in Egypt and Oman, that's where we might want attention to kind of both elements. And here's kind of an interesting result. You may have some societies where there is a need or a lot of opportunities to start businesses, but we need to think about how do those businesses get sustained? What do we need to do to make sure that they transition into maturity? At GEM, we really look every year. I mean, we're looking at the relationship. We understand there's going to be time lags, and I've seen this in the United States. So you have a bump up in entrepreneurship. A couple years later, you see it in established business activity. Most of the time, and I've actually looked a lot at time lags and looked at, are these persistent results over time? Many of the times that is the case. We also have to acknowledge and look back, and this is why it's important to do longitudinal analysis, look back at, maybe it's where we have entrepreneurship bumped up and we're not going to see the effects of that in established business activity for a while. Okay, all context. So we've more increasingly acknowledged the role of established business established business or large companies or organizations. And here, we've done this for several years where we've looked at entrepreneurial employees, recognizing that you could be in a startup, but you also, and especially in economies where it's really attractive to hold a job and work for others, that you're going to attract entrepreneurs in the mix. We have 3 Latin American Caribbean economies on the right-hand side, where the blue bars show very high TEA rates, less likely to be in established businesses. Of course, this might depend on the supply of employment with organizations. On the left-hand side, just low rates in both of those activities, but in like the UK and Australia, 2 developed economies, it's almost as likely that you're going to be entrepreneurial in a startup as in an organization. But we also this year recognize that entrepreneurs may participate as sponsors of startups. So we looked at entrepreneurship that was independent of employers versus those that were sponsored by the employers. So they might be startups that had some ownership by their employers. And in Brazil and Guatemala, not really the case. As you see the orange bar, most of the activity is independent. Whereas on the left-hand side, the bulk of entrepreneurship tends to be sponsored by employers. So it's good to recognize that. Again, in the middle, we have both. That's pretty prevalent. Now let's look at really equity and that the extent that all groups in society are participating in entrepreneurship. We have a lot of measures of this. We could also look at household income levels. We could also look at education levels. But the typical ones we look at are gender and age in the global report. And for gender, another map I did. And this has the darker portions are higher female to male ratios. And in 4 countries, we have equal or higher levels of participation by women compared to men. So in Saudi Arabia, I could say 12 women for every 10 men participating. So really high rates of female entrepreneurship. And you can also see Qatar is just to the east of Saudi Arabia, smaller country, also has, so we have 2 Middle East countries. I tell you, just being in GEM, I don't know if you have all felt this, that entrepreneurship's really heating up in the Middle East. We're seeing a lot of changes in the results. Madagascar is also has gender equality, and Brazil has many times over the past years have shown equal results in terms of TEA rates with women compared to men. Now, in terms of the age profile, this is what we typically see. I just have 3. I don't want to put big line graphs for every country up here. But what we typically see is entrepreneurship peaks in early and we might say mid-career, right? That's typical. So younger people might be in college. They might have required military service. They maybe don't have the networks and resources. They may need to have employment first, right? And so right around early mid-career, they're starting to get the networks, the resources, the credibility to be starting businesses. But interestingly, this is not always a profile in every country. In fact, in 3 of the European countries, we see similar rates among the youngest group, the 18 to 24-year-olds. But as you can see, the entrepreneurship rates tend to drop off after that. So really interesting policy implications here. Now let's look at the impact, and this always gets the attention of policymakers because what we'd like in a society is entrepreneurs to create jobs, to contribute toward innovation in their society, and also be part of making that society globally competitive. So first of all, looking at job creation, and we just asked the entrepreneurs about their ambitions for creating jobs. This might be because of their opportunity. They see the opportunity that can really grow their companies fast. It may be their ambition. They want to grow their business. As you see on the right-hand side, the orange parts of the bars are the percentage of entrepreneurs that anticipating creating 6 or more jobs in the next 5 years. So in these countries, all in the Middle East, more than half the entrepreneurs, I think it's even more than 60%, anticipating creating 6 or more jobs. On the left-hand side, especially with Madagascar and Brazil, we have a lot of entrepreneurs, but they tend to be smaller businesses. So looking at the scope of activity, as you can see here in Poland and Madagascar, the blue part of the graphs, those are the proportion of entrepreneurs that are selling mostly locally. So we can see that most of the entrepreneurial activity is local in these countries. In Japan and Qatar, the bulk of entrepreneurial activity in the orange part of the bar is national, so they sell nationally. But then when we look at Slovenia and Portugal, in the gray part, it actually shows more than anything that they're selling internationally, so high international participation. When we think of the level of newness of a business, the offerings of an entrepreneur, we started to think this year that for whom? Is it new to the people in your area? Is it new nationally, or is it new to the world? So I have a couple of examples here, pretty interesting. In Chile, which has the highest TEA rate in the sample, most of the entrepreneurs in the yellow part are not innovative, and that's really all the case in pretty much most countries. But the blue part of this pie chart shows the newness to the area. So we could say in Chile, high rates of entrepreneurship, most of it is not innovative or innovative locally. Then we look at Switzerland. In the orange part of this pie chart are new to the country. So we have a little bit different profile in Switzerland. So mostly new products and services within the country. Germany, which has reported the highest TEA rate since the beginning of GEM, so the highest rate in, I think, 21 years. Now we see that gray part. And that's kind of what we want to see, right, in many countries, that now a good proportion of entrepreneurs in Germany create products and services that are new to the world. And I just want to point out a small country, Luxembourg, has really highly innovative overall, including innovative to the area that they're in and nationally, but overall high level of innovation. Okay, I might be almost done with my graphs. I think I have one more. National entrepreneurship framework conditions. So we acknowledge that entrepreneurship is really dependent on the society within which that activity occurs. And so I just want to show you that we have 10 conditions that we assess through an expert survey of at least 36 experts in all these areas that we believe contribute toward the vitality of entrepreneurship in a society. And I've just put a chart up here, one more graph with 3 of the countries that were in the top 10 in terms of the rating on these conditions. So we asked these experts how they rate all these various conditions that I showed you on the previous slide. In red, we have China. So interestingly, internal market dynamics, the extent that we have free, open, and growing markets, and that price and availability of entry are not constrained by established firms. So, interestingly, what is going on in China now with the coronavirus, and I know Chantal Lin, we were talking about this last night, we might think about the role of entrepreneurship in societies that are going through major environmental shocks, right, such as what China is going through, and how that might affect business activity and how maybe entrepreneurship might play a role. Switzerland show the highest results, as you can see, and it's maybe because Aileen now is, we could give you some credit for that, but leading GEM. But as you can see, the green line is high on most of the indicators, but in particular physical infrastructure. So infrastructure might be communication, transportation, the availability of office space, particularly high in Switzerland. We tend to see this higher in the developed economies. I always say that physical infrastructure doesn't cause you to start a business. You don't start a business because I have good internet, but it sure helps you, it sure supports your business activity. United States, not as high on many of the indicators, but Where the United States was highest among all the countries assessed was in the cultural and social norms, which is I think, exciting for us in the U.S. And that just involves the extent entrepreneurs are celebrated and respected, the extent there are mentors and role models in society, as well as the support for risk-taking. So what we can do is we can look across these economies and think about, what could we learn from Switzerland? What can we learn from China? What can we learn from these countries in terms of the areas that are strong? And where are the areas where we may need to think about improving conditions? Because we know that entrepreneurship is really reliant on all these conditions. It's not just providing finance, right? That we really need to think about holistically about the ecosystem. So just want to close with some of the pictures that we've highlighted in the report, which will be available, I heard, at 10:30 today. And I want us to really celebrate how GEM can contribute toward all these guiding principles for improving entrepreneurship in society. And this is really what we're looking for, a variety of entrepreneurs across all ethnicities, all national origins, gender, age, and so forth. So I'd like to thank you, and thank you. Yeah. So we have time for a few questions, and I'd like to bring up Stephen Hill, who is the main writer on the report. And thank you, Stephen, for all your work. We were getting lots of emails from him all throughout December and even January. We really appreciate all your work. And Niels Bosma is part of the author team as well. So if you'd like to come up, do we have any questions? Oh. You can answer them.
No. Yes, it is. Okay. So I'd be curious. So you saw a few countries where you said it. I'm assuming the global is export. And if it is, how much is it enabled by digitalization of the economy? So digital being able to reach out. So is there a way to tease that out or no?
I think that's a very good question. We are not able to tease it out at the individual level. What we might be able to do is to see, okay, if we see the country pattern, does that match with the country level information we have about digitalization, for example? So we could try to make that analysis. I think that's. I think it does have an influence, definitely. Yeah, for sure. So it's about exports, but it's also about the value proposition that can be interesting. Also think about the value chain. So it can be different things, of course. So these are different elements that I think that come into play. Tourism, also important. So yeah.
I was also going to add that, especially for some of the smaller countries and countries where you might not have the physical infrastructure in regions of the country, large countries like China and many countries maybe in Africa, and even the United States, digitalization is really, really pretty critical. But another result that we've noticed over time is the prevalence of single-person businesses or small businesses is not necessarily a bad thing, because you might be engaging through digital technology a number of stakeholders. So you might be part of a value network. And we used to think, okay, that it's more the low-income countries that will have the smaller businesses. But then we started to see a lot of European countries like Netherlands have a lot of single-person businesses. And so then you start thinking there might be something going on there. So the role of technology is probably important in almost like a distributive entrepreneurship.
Hi there. Good morning, Mark Donahue. I was curious about your slide up there where you had different motivations, like to make a difference in the world or to earn a living, build wealth. And has there been some trend to make a difference in the world over the last 20 years that's very definable in the research results? And I'm also curious what the age of the average respondents are, because that tends to change how somebody answers that question in my experience.
I'll go. Yeah, definitely. I mean, so responding to your last element, I would say that's true. So it's what we see also. That it moves along with age, probably. So this is the first year we actually introduced this question. So in terms of seeing trends, this is difficult. It's based on, of course, also other research we see that we tend to see that people are more inclined to be concerned about this, and we see also initiatives from the business world that are taking place more often. Around this, think also about the Business Roundtable decision last June, I think, here in America. So we do see this happening, but we cannot really pinpoint this with GEM data, unfortunately. So that's what we will do actually. So in the next cycle, we will ask again a question that asks the entrepreneurs to divide 100 points over social goals, financial goals, and environmental goals. We've also done that in 2009. So in that way, next year we could probably make some kind of comparison. Yeah.
Okay, can I just add that there's a mountain of data. We've looked at motivation and gender, but there's every opportunity to compare motivation to all of those other variables: age, location, education level. That's a job for the national reports.
Hi, Todd Maznicki, MBA, class of 2000. First, thanks for bringing this to Miami and for this amazing collaboration. It's very insightful. And also, it's been 20 plus years, you know, this collaboration. What do you see as a huge or a big trend in the next 10 or 20? Because you've probably seen some, you know, during this tenure. What do you see that maybe the rest of us don't?
Shall I have a go? Yes. Okay. If you go to the publication, the printed version, in a later chapter, we look at trends over time, but it's not easy because not every country participates in every year. What we've done this time is to look at the question, is the level of entrepreneurial activity increasing over time? And I think the answer is fairly conclusive. I think the answer is pretty much yes. And that's not an answer I expected, but it's only yes for those countries that have participated in all of those years. So it's early days. As to the future, I think that trend's going to continue. I don't see any reason for a decline in entrepreneurship. I think all the evidence is pointing towards future increases, I think.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that, but then focus maybe on the Dutch case. So I'm from the Netherlands. So also there we've seen a jump in entrepreneurship rates over time. So partly this can be explained by actually technology making it much easier to start a business. Also regulation has been facilitating entrepreneurship. So these are elements there as well. But we also see that kind of the way entrepreneurship manifests itself is different. We've also seen the entanglement with labor regulation. They try to actually increase permanent contracts by disallowing fixed contracts. So after two years of fixed contracts, employers actually needed to move on to permanent contracts. With the expectations that it would lead to more employees with permanent contracts, but the opposite obviously happened. So we saw actually more people doing the same activities they did before as an employee, but now as an independent professional, as a self-employed. So I'm only saying this because you will see different stories in different countries. It's all quite a complex collection of different determinants that caused these trends in entrepreneurship. And that's why also this new project of the ecosystems can be important, because they identify the different elements that are at play in facilitating entrepreneurship.
Good morning. I was wondering if there are any correlations or actually data around how much of entrepreneurship is part of global wealth, for instance, and that sort of distinction. I think it was the World Bank who was saying that 2/3 of global wealth is intellectual property, education, things of that nature. And it's interesting to see I don't know if that's something that you all are looking at. How much of that is actually part of or due to entrepreneurship?
Yeah, that's a very ambitious question, so thanks for that. Well, obviously there's a big academic community, not only in this room, but also outside, that are using GEM data also to, for instance, in economic growth, regressions, economic models, and there are some indications that entrepreneurship matters next to the like labor and financial capital and R&D, for example. So there are indications, but it's to be honest, it's very difficult because you have a lot of indirect effects that can be at play and conflicting effects. So it's quite difficult to really pinpoint this. So I'm afraid as GEM, we also want to have integrity. That's also what we discussed yesterday. So we cannot make these kinds of claims as GEM, I would say. So we leave that open to the academic community. Yeah.
Hello. In the result, I found, we found that, some countries like Japan, Taiwan, their entrepreneurial mindset, their innovation is quite, the less compared to the other countries. But the number of patent application from Japan, Taiwan is quite higher from the compared to the other countries. Is there any, explanation for this?
So I think you're saying that entrepreneurial activity is lower, but the patent applications into really interesting. You have to think about where the knowledge is being generated in society. Is it through government? Is it the universities? And oftentimes the universities are licensing out to large companies because it's much harder to try to get technologies into individual startups, right? And so one thing we need to think about, in terms of the knowledge and intellectual property, is to what extent is that held by entrepreneurs versus maybe governments and large established companies?
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I mean, there's also a lot of innovation without patenting, but also there's a lot of patenting without innovation. So these two are definitely not the same thing. So I think that also should be taken into account.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been really a pleasure to present these results, and I'm sure you're all excited to see the report, which will be available outside. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for coming out.